Hi, Phil Beattie, Director of Coffee with Dillanos Coffee Roasters, and I want to talk to you about grind today. Coffee grinding is one of the most crucial steps to getting all of the great flavors out of a coffee. You probably read the description of a flavor on the bag. It says things like red apple, orange citrus, mandarin, floral aroma, and sometimes if you're tasting a coffee and you get none of those, it might be that your grind is not right and it's not extracting properly in the brew process. So let's talk about grinding. Basic function of grinding is to crush or chop the coffee bean or seed down into smaller portions so that the water can extract the flavor out of it. As a general rule, the longer that the water is in contact with the grind, the coarser the grind is. So if you think of, as an example, espresso, which is the fastest, quickest extraction of coffee, that water is in contact for a very short period of time before it flushes through into your shot glasses. So you have a very, very fine grind for that. On the other end of the spectrum, you have something like a French press, which is 4 minutes of steep time, a long contact ratio of water to grounds. So in that case, you want a very coarse grind. But let's talk about the equipment first. So most of you have probably seen a blade grinder. This is the old school grinder where you take the lid off, you put your coffee in there, there's a spinning blade that goes super fast and chops it up. This is not recommended. This is not going to give you consistent grind particle size. So for starters, let's not use this. But if you have to use this, if it's your only option, then I understand it. The trick is you have to treat it like a martini shaker. So put your coffee in it, plug it in, hold grind, and shake it. Shake it for about 12 to 15 seconds, and that should give you a workable grind for your usual drip coffee brewer. It's going to give you something like this. The problem with it, and the reason we don't recommend it, is that you have particles that are both very, very small, like espresso grind, and also big, big chunks of beans, like a French press grind. And so when you have that spread of particle size, you end up with inconsistent extraction and you end up with off flavors coming in the cup. So whenever possible, try not to use this and instead use what we call a Burr grinder. Now, if I were going to recommend a setup for somebody to brew coffee at home, I would say that the one thing that you should splurge and spend money on is your grinder. The grinder is the most important piece of technology that will give you a consistent and good cup of coffee. Inside this are burrs, metal burrs that spin, and you can control the spacing between those burrs, which gives you a very, very consistent grind particle size. So then if you have it coarse, all the grinds are going to be coarse. If you have it fine, every particle will be fine. This particular grinder, the Baratza, is a very, very good grinder for home. It's a workhorse, it runs very well, has a strong motor, and will grind your coffee quickly and quietly and accurately. They even have models, if you upgrade from this one, that have a built-in scale, which will help you brew consistently as well. So when we're looking at grind, remember we're talking about time, water contact with the grounds. So we start with the longest contact for a hot cup of coffee, which is going to be the press pot or French press. And this is very old school, makes a very strong cup of coffee. You put grounds in, you put your 200-degree water on, and then let it steep for 4 minutes before plunging it. Because of that long exposure time of water to coffee, we keep a very, very coarse grind. Similar to like a coarse sea salt, some people describe it as. And you can see there's larger chunks of the coffee grounds in there, and that's so that we don't extract the bitterness out of the coffee because it's sitting in contact with water for so long. Below that on the grind spectrum, you're looking at one of my favorite brewing devices, which is called a clever. And for this one, we're steeping, but we're also draining. So the coffee goes into a filter, it steeps for a couple minutes, and then you set this on top of your cup and it drains the water out. So it's still a very long contact time, but not quite as long as a French press. So we go a couple notches finer on the grind, as you see here, just slightly finer. And then we have our traditional drip brew method. With a drip brewer, that water is coming over the grounds, passing through them relatively quickly before it ends up in your decanter for a brewed pot of coffee. So here we go slightly finer again, and as you can see in this picture, we have something that's starting to look more like maybe a coarse sand. That is most common grind. Now, if we get into some of our more manual brew, single cup brewing, or a Chemex, or a pour over, these ones, because it's a smaller amount of coffee, we can actually grind a little bit finer. And so you'll see that we grind a little bit finer than that, more of a fine sand coarseness to it, and that is going to extract all of those great flavors out of the coffee. Finally, for a manual brew, we have a really fun device, which is the AeroPress. These are great at home, but also great on the road. And this is going to give you something similar to the strength of brew from an espresso. And so for this, you're going to grind very fine, probably almost as fine as this Barazza will grind, all the way at the finest setting. And that's going to give you a really strong espresso-like extraction with this, which is, again, you pour hot water on there, let it steep for a very short amount of time, and then plunge it through. So that's the basics of grind. Of course, when you get your grinder and your brewing setup, everyone is slightly different. So I can't tell, that's why I'm not telling you a number. I'm not saying French press is grind number 9, because number 9 on this grinder may be different from your grinder at home. So you always have to experiment a little bit. When you first get a new grinder, try brewing up 2 or 3 pots of coffee and taste them out and see which one tastes best with different grinds. And once you narrow in on what grind works best for you, you can repeat it over and over and have your great tasting cup of coffee every morning. I hope this helps. If you ever want to chat about grind, hit us up at Dillanos. We'd love to chat. Thanks.